Nowhere is the Imperium's might more plainly seen than in the vessels of its star-spanning navy. As war rages, colossal warships slip anchor to smite the foe with the righteous fury of the faithful. Such vessels are both Imperium's stalwart shield and gleaming spear.
Hello everyone, this is an Ace review, and today we are looking at Battlefleet Gothic Armada 2. While this particular title did launch just today, I have been able to try out the open beta for some time now. So for those who want me to cut to the chase, let me say that for RTS fans, this is a very easy recommendation, especially if you want your games to have more tactical depth to them. As for those who want a more in-depth review, well, let's dive in. Let's start off by pointing out the fact that the Battlefleet Gothic Armada series itself is a space-based fleet RTS set in the Warhammer 40k universe, a setting that is well known for being extremely over the top. For example, in this particular game, you'll be commanding capital ships that can easily reach several miles long while looking like giant floating cathedrals, as you battle demons in space. Of course, veterans of the previous game, as well as fans of the Warhammer 40k universe in general, will already know this. So instead, we will focus on the changes that this particular title has made to make it stand out in comparison to Battlefleet Gothic Armada 1. Perhaps the biggest and most important change I should mention is the fact that at the tactical level, the game has been expanded upon greatly. A great example of this would be the fact that not only do players now have to keep an eye on the ship's hull and shield strength, but also the crew numbers as well as the crew morale. Because of this, it's now possible to completely disable enemy ships by wiping out their crew, turning them into drifting hulks. Do this enough and you can completely win the match this way, but these drifting hulks can still pose a great threat to you. For one thing, enemy ships can conduct boarding actions on these empty hulks, reclaiming them. Or alternatively, a player can decide to have the ship self-destruct on its own, causing a massive explosion that can either damage or outright destroy nearby ships. In the case of the crew's morale, if you manage to deplete their spirit enough, they can try to mutiny and flee the battlefield, taking them out of the fight. And it's important to note that crew morale not only gets depleted by damage to the ship itself, but it can also happen due to nearby ships getting destroyed as well. I found that these systems can actually have a really interesting impact on the tactics that you choose when playing this game. During one of my skirmish matches, for example, one of my battleships had got too close to an enemy Tyranid hive fleet, and the crew had got wiped out. However, I decided to order the ship to self-destruct since the enemy's fleet was nearby. And since the Tyranid ships at the front of the formation had charged into my battleship, this meant that the entire formation itself was bunched together and unable to escape the explosion, which not only damaged most of the fleet but destroyed a few of the smaller ships as well. And since they were all bunched up together, that meant that the morale hit was much higher, causing the entire enemy fleet to mutiny and instantly giving me the win. As you can probably tell by now, bunching up all of your units together into a giant blob to try to steamroll the enemy doesn't really work all that well in this particular game. Instead, tactics are all the more important here, as well as resource management, which brings me to another major change with this particular entry in the franchise. And that is the fact that a lot of special abilities within the game actually have limited uses. This prevents players from spamming things like torpedoes or nova cannons, since you only get 3 shots per ship per match. The same rules also apply to lightning strikes and boarding actions, which are a welcome change to Eldar players, I'm sure. A set of abilities, however, that have remained infinite in their uses would be the deck commands, which have now actually become semi-permanent. A great example of what I mean by this is the fact that if you order an escort ship to run silent, it will continue running silent throughout the rest of the match unless you give it another deck command. And that brings me quite cleanly to the subject of the user interface, which has become vastly more friendly in comparison to the previous entry. In Battlefleet Gothic Armada 1, you had to select every single ship individually to perform special actions with these ships. By comparison, players can now activate these special abilities with their ships without having to select them individually. So overall, I really have nothing but good things to say about the changes made to the tactical level of the game. So let's move on to the strategic level for the campaign mode. The first thing you'll notice when it comes to the campaign mode of the game is that it has been greatly expanded upon in comparison to the previous entry. For a start, rather than just one campaign, we now have the option of 3, each providing its own perspective on the Warhammer 40k universe. All 3 take place over 800 years after the events of the last game, with the prologue effectively starting the 13th Black Crusade and covering the epic titanic clash between the forces of the Imperium and the Dark Servants of Chaos over the grim fate of Cadia itself. Of the 3 campaigns that players will then get to choose, the Imperium campaign itself is the easiest of the 3. I say this because it's the only one that really provides a tutorial section, and also because you can get your economy going at the strategic level relatively quickly in this campaign. By contrast, the Necron campaign, and especially the Tyranid campaign, require a more aggressive approach, as the player will start off losing resources every turn, with aggressive expansion being the only real way to fix this problem early on. Speaking of which, the resources themselves are used not only to repair ships that you already have, but build new fleets, as well as upgrade planets that you've already conquered and build defenses. Overall, I have to say I'm genuinely pleased by the strategic changes that the game has made here as well. Battlefleet Gothic Armada 1's campaign was definitely interesting, but it had a habit of becoming a bad case of whack-a-mole every now and then. This is because in that game you already controlled all of the map and were simply desperately trying not to lose it. There is, however, one thing I do need to discuss that might be a turnoff for fans of the original game, and that would have to be the changes made to the progression system. In Battlefleet Gothic Armada 1, players had to build up a fleet from scratch, not only getting new ships, but turning the novice crews into seasoned veterans, and unlocking all kinds of special abilities and buffs along the way that allowed you to completely specialize your particular ships. In Battlefleet Gothic Armada 2, however, this system has been vastly simplified, and all but removed from the skirmish and multiplayer modes. This is of course because it was very difficult to balance this in the multiplayer portion of the game, so I can see why they decided to remove it, but it is something to mention. That being said, the game more than makes up for it thanks to the increased tactical depth that we see. Which brings me quite nicely back to what I said at the start of this video. This is a very easy game to recommend to RTS fans, particularly ones that want more depth in their games. I'm genuinely looking forward to where this particular IP goes next, and what the developers decide to do with it. But until then, this has been Ace. Hope to see you guys again soon. Take care. Ace out.
Show us the enemy.